Hey guys, welcome back to Chef Sahira Speaks. I'm Chef Sahira, and today I'll be showing you how I make my delicious apple pie. This recipe is the one that I learned in culinary school many years ago, but I made some adjustments over time, and trust me, you will love it. Whether you want to bake this pie for a holiday dessert or just because you're craving something sweet, keep watching and I'll show you exactly how to make it. Before we dive into making the best apple pie ever, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the notification bell to be alerted when I upload more delicious baking videos. Now let's get into it. So to make the crust, we're going to need some flour, some salt, some sugar, some cold butter that we have cubed up, as well as some ice cold water. So we're just going to combine our flour with our sugar and our salt. And we're going to give that a quick whisk. Now it's time to add the butter. Make sure your butter is cold. This is essential for creating a flaky crust. You can use a pastry cutter, fork, or even your hands. I'm using my hands. I like to get a feel for it. And we cut the butter into the flour. We're looking for a texture that resembles coarse crumbs with some pieces of butter still visible. Those bits of butter will melt when a crust bakes, creating little pockets of steam that make it super flaky. So it's essential because we want the top crust to be flaky. So we want to keep some of those big bits of butter. Next, we're going to slowly pour in the ice water, mixing it just until the dough comes together. You want the dough to hold when you pinch it. If it's too wet, add a little extra flour. If it's too dry, you need just a little bit more water. And be careful not to overwork the dough. Handling it too much may make it tough, but it also may start to make the butter melt. Now that our dough has come together, we'll divide it into 2 discs, wrap them in plastic wrap, and let them chill in the fridge for at least an hour or so. So now it's time to peel our apples. I have some Granny Smith apples here, as well as 2 Redskin apples. I believe those are Red Delicious apples. You want to use Granny Smith apples because they hold up during the cooking process. The reason I'm using the Redskin apples, just to give some texture. So I'm coring my apples. I cut them in half. I'm coring my apples. I'm using a melon ball to take out the middle, take out the core. And then I'm just going to cut off the ends of the apples. So now I'm slicing my apples. I'm only slicing the Granny Smith. I'm going to keep the 2 different types of apples separate. So I'm slicing my Granny Smith right now. You don't want them too thick and you don't want them too thin. I would say roughly maybe like a quarter of an inch. So I have the 2 bowls and I separated my apples. My Granny Smith in one bowl and my Redskin, let's just call them delicious apples, in another bowl. So I'm going to cook down my apples. I'm only cooking down my Granny Smith apples. This is what I do differently. In culinary school, they will have you just, once your apples are peeled, you toss them in the spices and you put them directly into your baking dish. I take the time to cook down my apples a little bit to reduce some of the liquid. So I just have a skillet and add a little bit of butter to the pan before adding my apples. I then add some white sugar and some brown sugar just to draw out some of the liquid. You can totally skip this step and just skip over to creating your pie filling and toss your apples with your pie filling. But I'm going to cook down only my Granny Smith apples, and then I'll later combine them with my spices, and then I'll add in my Red Delicious apples. Once my apples have cooked for about 5 minutes, I don't want to cook them too long, I'm going to place them on a parchment-lined sheet pan, and this will help my apples cool down. I'll set these apples to the side to cool, and I'll prepare my pie filling. In a separate bowl, I'm adding some granulated sugar, some brown sugar, some cornstarch, some flour, some salt, and my cinnamon and nutmeg. I'll give this a quick whisk and combine all of my ingredients, and I'll put it aside while I prepare my dough. So I'm ready to roll my dough, making sure that it's not too cold and it's not too soft. You can't roll cold dough. So I'm just flouring my work surface, my dough, as well as my rolling pin. And I'm starting from the center and rolling to the front and to the back as I turn my dough. I continue to turn the dough so that I can maintain its shape. Just keep in mind that you should still see the butter in your dough, and as you're rolling, the dough will be a little stickier than a normal dough. So continue to flour your surface, lightly flour your surface, and if you need to, flour your rolling pin a little bit more. So we're going to lightly flour our rolling pin, roll our dough up on our rolling pin, and place it in our pie dish. We're going to make sure it's snug to the sides, and then we'll trim some of the edges. We need to leave some overhang so that it can adhere to our top layer. What I will say is that you need to be mindful to work fast because your dough needs to stay cold. Working with the flaky dough, you really have to keep going back and forth, putting your dough in the I actually put mine in the freezer. And if you look, you can see the butter in your dough. So now I'm going to combine my cooked apples with my red skinned apples. I'm going to add my pie filling and combine that, and then I'll add a splash of vanilla. Taking my pie crust out the refrigerator. It's still nice and cold. So before I add my apples, I want to make sure I dock the bottom of my crust. And again, we dock our dough so the steam can release and the dough doesn't rise up during the cooking process. So as I fill my dish with my apples, and I really could have used like 2 extra apples. I wasn't planning on using this dish, so it's larger than I thought. I'm taking some fresh lemon juice and sprinkling it around the apples. And I'm also dotting my apples with some butter. And for this full recipe, there'll be a link in the description box. The full recipe is on my website, sweetnesssocietystore.com. For some reason, this didn't record. I thought it was recording. Before you lay your top crust on top of your apples, you just want to kind of give it an egg wash around the overhang of the dough on the bottom, especially the rim, right? Because we want to squeeze the 2 doughs together. Once we squeeze them together, we'll trim it up, and then we start to tuck our dough under. So here I'm not going to crimp it. I'm just taking my thumb to just kind of seal in and give it some kind of decorative edge. This is actually the first way I learned in school, is with my thumb, just pressing it in. Very simple. You could also use a fork to give it a nice finish too. It's so important to keep your dough cold. So I'm going to pop this back in the refrigerator. Once I take it out, I'm going to egg wash the top. I'm using my pastry brush to brush my egg wash on top. And then I'm sprinkling some cinnamon sugar. I always have cinnamon sugar on here. So it's going to give it a nice top. The egg is going to give it a nice golden brown color. But also I'm going to spread some cinnamon sugar on top as well. before we bake it, we cut 4 slits in it. This is to release some of that steam. So I'm just doing 4 cuts. We're going to bake this at 375 for about 50 to 60 minutes, or until the crust is golden brown and the filling starts to bubble. So this is why I have my pie on my baking sheet, because it will be all over your oven, as well as I lined it with some parchment paper to catch some of that liquid also. But that's when you know your apples that's a sign that it's done, when you start seeing it bubble out like that. So that's it, guys. This is my homemade apple pie recipe. I make it all the time. I think the crust is what makes this pie, the buttery, flaky crust. Whether you make this pie for the holidays or just because, this recipe will definitely wow your family and friends. This pie is great on its own, but it really pairs well with a good cup of coffee, or for you tea lovers, a good cup of tea. For the perfect a la mode experience, serve this pie warm with a scoop of your favorite ice cream. This is actually my go-to for eating this pie. I don't even know why I make this pie once a year. If you like this recipe, give this video a thumbs up, consider subscribing to Chef Sahira Speaks, and hit that notification bell so that you never miss out on another delicious recipe and some baking tips. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.